The first year after Philip cheated. I was drowning in pain, sleepless and convinced I was worthless. But still in consideration of our child I refused to divorce him. Second year. Philip moved out. He said we should separate for 2 years so I could think things through. After that he'd file for divorce. One night my son had a sudden bout of acute gastroenteritis. I rushed him to the hospital in the middle of a snowstorm. He kept throwing up the entire way and I was alone struggling to hold everything together. Somehow we made it through. The third year. During summer break. My son wanted to travel. Philip said he didn't have time. So I gathered my courage and took him on a solo trip to Japan. We rode trains from Fukuoka to Saga, hopping off to explore along the way. It was an adventure, just the two of us, and we loved every moment of it. The fourth year. Philip broke up with his mistress. He told me he wanted to come home. I smiled and turned him down. No thanks. This home has been just fine without you. Philip called, saying he wanted to meet and discuss the divorce. That's when it hit me, we had been separated for almost 2 years. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, I felt momentarily dazed. He shifted uncomfortably at the entrance. Can I come in? I nodded and stepped aside. He took off his shoes in the entryway, then instinctively opened the shoe cabinet for a pair of slippers, only to find a single pair, my son's. Unmoved, I said, just come in. I did a deep clean recently and got rid of everything we don't need. Right. His response was quiet. And I could hear the slight edge of displeasure in his tone. But back when he walked out with his suitcase he had said, I'm never coming back. Time moves on. When someone leaves, their things become nothing more than clutter waiting to be thrown away. On the table my freshly brewed tea was still steaming. Out of politeness I asked, do you want some tea? He hesitated and before he could answer I remembered. Oh right. You don't drink tea. Then I added almost absent-mindedly, I sold the coffee machine ages ago. Tea is all there is, take it or leave it. He froze for a moment before murmuring almost to himself, there's hardly any trace of me left in this place. I smiled. This was never your home. Didn't you already find yourself a new one? Philip and I met in college and eventually became a couple. He was gentle, capable at work and always knew how to take care of others. 3 years into our marriage I gave birth to David. As a freelancer I had the flexibility to balance work and childcare. With the help of a nanny I never felt overwhelmed. Besides, back then Philip would come home from work and help with chores, spending time with our son. The three of us lived in harmony and I truly believed our happiness would last forever. But when David turned 3 everything changed. Philip's parents had been living in their old house, but after a drawn-out dispute with a difficult neighbor, they decided to move. Instead of moving in with us they rented the house next door. I wasn't really in a position to object. They weren't imposing on our space after all. Philip's parents were traditional, hard-working people. His mother, Maria, insisted on cooking all our meals and constantly urged us to come over for dinner. His father, on the other hand, adored David. One day he beamed at me and said, Victoria, you're busy with work during the day. Why not leave David with us? We'll take care of him. Before I could respond, Philip jumped in eagerly. That's a great idea. That way you won't be so exhausted. I swallowed back my refusal. I told myself it wasn't so bad. His parents were highly educated and genuinely kind. They just wanted to help. And since they lived next door I could always check in on David anytime. At first, this arrangement felt like a relief. I had more time to focus on my work, and even though I occasionally disagreed with them on parenting matters, our interactions were mostly peaceful. Every evening Philip and I would eat dinner at his parents' house before bringing David home for playtime. It became a routine one I quickly got used to. I thought this would be our life, steady, warm, and happy. I never saw it coming when Philip started to change. At some point he developed a sudden passion for fitness. He started going on late-night runs. I need to stay in shape, he told me. When David grows up I don't want to be some old man who's too weak to play with him. I laughed and let him be. Even on weekends he was often gone. The company's been organizing team-building activities, he explained. It's all about strengthening teamwork. Gradually he spent less and less time with me and David. Whenever he came home he would enthusiastically share stories from these outings. You won't believe it. One of my teammates almost fell off a cliff trying to win first place. Good thing I caught him just in time. I never wanted to dampen his mood, so I simply listened. Team-building activities were part of work after all. Then one day I accidentally saw the photos on his phone. That teammate he was so proud of? It wasn't him, it was a woman. The same woman who was also his regular workout partner. I brought it up casually, testing the waters. He just laughed it off. Oh come on, she's married too. You're overthinking it. I felt ridiculous for even asking. After all these years I trusted his upbringing, his morals. He loved David, his parents lived right next door. Surely he wouldn't do anything stupid. But fate has a way of humbling the naive. When David turned 4 I learned the truth. He had cheated. With her. And it had been going on for a while. That day was, without a doubt, one of the worst days of my life. I had made a reckless investment in gold futures, only for the market to plummet due to global instability. In just 24 hours I lost nearly $200,000. To make things worse, a major client I had been negotiating a long-term contract with called me that same day. Sorry, they said. Almost apologetically. The final approval didn't go through. They insisted on signing with a big corporation instead. 2 devastating blows in a row and I completely fell apart. Philip was away on a business trip. The house was empty. I came up with an excuse to skip dinner at my in-laws and didn't bring David home either. By the time midnight approached, hunger gnawed at my stomach, burning like acid, but I had no appetite. I curled up under my desk, the room cloaked in darkness. The only light came from the dim glow of the street lamp outside. Slipping through the gaps in the curtains, I bit down on my fingers absent-mindedly, trying to figure out how to explain to Philip that my impatience had led to such a massive financial loss. I had no idea where I'd find another client of that scale to make up for the deal I had lost. My mind felt like it was crawling with ants, restless and unbearable. In the end I decided to call Philip. He had the right to know about my mistake. And deep down, I still longed for his comfort. The phone rang. No answer. I called again. And again. Still nothing. That was odd. Philip was usually up past 1 when he was home. Why wasn't he picking up? A sudden wave of unease washed over me. Had something happened to him? With trembling fingers I kept dialing. 5 calls. 10. Nothing. At the 22nd attempt he finally answered. But something was off. He wasn't speaking to me. Divorce isn't that simple. It's not like she did anything wrong. My heart clenched so hard it felt like it might stop. That was Philip's voice. My breath hitched. And my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. The man I had spent years with, the man I had trusted completely. Had he cheated on me? Philip kept talking. My parents wouldn't agree so easily either. The kid is still young. Then a woman's voice cut in, laced with frustration. So what am I supposed to do? I can't live like this anymore. I'm getting a divorce no matter what. Philip's voice softened as he tried to soothe her. Don't rush. Even if we divorce, it won't happen overnight. How about we plan our Miami trip first? Book a nice hotel, I'll cover the cost. Miami. Suddenly I remembered. Just a few days ago he had mentioned an upcoming business trip. 1 week in Miami. Turns out it wasn't for work. It was a vacation. With her. A sharp, suffocating pain gripped my chest. I clutched at my heart, gasping for breath, forcing myself to listen to the sickeningly intimate conversation between my husband and his mistress. Then I heard him say the words that shattered everything. I haven't loved her in a long time. It's just responsibility. I couldn't take it anymore. With a violent swing of my arm, I hurled my phone to the floor. The impact sent a few books tumbling from the nearby shelf. The call cut off. I curled in on myself and sobbed, my cries raw and broken. My mind was blank, completely numb. My unfocused gaze landed on one of the fallen books. A picture book. The cover showed the Little Mermaid dissolving into sea foam under the sunlight. Just like that, the life I had believed in, the happiness I had cherished, gone. Vanished into thin air, like a fragile bubble bursting in the wind. By the time Philip returned home the next night, it was already late. I was sitting on the couch. My eyes swollen from crying, watching him coldly. He must have seen the call history on his phone by now. A part of me still held on to the faintest hope that he'd be flustered, scrambling to explain, desperate to convince me it was all a misunderstanding. But all he did was stand at the doorway, calm and composed, and say, "I didn't mean for you to hear all that. I accidentally hit the answer button." And then, nothing. He fell into a long, heavy silence. I trembled, swallowing back the burning lump in my throat, my voice shaking as I asked, "Why? How could you do this to me? To David?" He kept his head down, staring at the floor. Not looking at me. Not saying a word. I snapped. Rushing toward him, I slapped him across the face. "Philip, you're not even human." Then I turned and stormed into the bedroom, dragging out a suitcase. "If this is how you want to handle things, then there's nothing left to say. I'm taking David and going back to my parents' house." For the first time that night he moved, stepping in front of me to block my way. "It's late. Don't make a scene. It's not that I don't want to talk. I just haven't figured out how." I looked up at him, my vision blurred with tears. But the truth was, we both knew I was bluffing. My parents' house was never an option. My mother had been sick for years. Her health was fragile, too weak to handle this kind of shock. The last time Philip and I had a big fight, I had called my mom in frustration and blurted out, "I can't take this anymore. I want a divorce." The next morning my father called, furious. "Do you even think before you speak? Your mother was up all night worrying. She ended up in the hospital this morning with heart trouble." From that moment on, I understood, I could never see my parents as my escape route. So, pulling out my suitcase was just a desperate attempt to force a reaction from him. But what reaction was I even hoping for? What was supposed to come next? I had no idea. My head was spinning with grief and rage, clinging to the impossible thought that maybe, just maybe, this was all a bad dream. That I'd wake up and none of this would be real. But it was real. That night we slept in separate rooms. Or at least he slept. I lay awake, tossing and turning, my mind a whirlwind of unanswered questions. Why? What did she have that I didn't? What made Philip forget this home, forget me? And why, even after being caught, didn't he even bother trying to lie to me, to reassure me, to soften the blow? A terrifying realization settled over me. Catching him cheating didn't automatically put me in the right. Didn't magically give me the power to reset our lives. Because his heart was already gone. And nothing I did could bring it back. The next day we sat across from each other on the couch, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. Philip ran a hand over his face, looking exhausted. Finally, he spoke. "I don't even know how things got to this point," he admitted. "Maybe it started after David was born. You focused all your attention on him. Or maybe it was when my parents moved next door. Knowing they could help with the house and the kid, I just started spending more time outside." His voice was slow, almost detached, as if he was trying to rationalize something irrational. "I never planned for anything to happen with her. Guess did. She moved here from out of town, married into a family with 2 kids. Their house is small. So she has to live with her in-laws. She's miserable. She'd vent to me about her home life, and at first I was just trying to be supportive, you know? A good boss checking in on my employee." And then, his words trailed off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I didn't want to hear it anyway. I cut in, my voice sharp and cold. "So what now? You want a divorce so you can marry your perfectly compatible subordinate?" I was yelling. But inside I was shaking. Because I was afraid of what he'd say next. Afraid he'd simply answer, "Yes, I want a divorce." At that moment, it wasn't even about the love that had already soured beyond recognition. It was the sheer terror of not knowing what came next. Yes, I was a freelancer. My time was flexible and I made my own money. But when work picked up, when deadlines piled up, I needed someone to help take care of David. For years, Philip's parents had filled that role. I had long forgotten what it was like to rely on a nanny. If we divorced and I had to raise David alone, could I even afford full-time childcare? My income fluctuated. Hiring a live-in nanny would cost nearly 10 grand a month. And that was assuming everything went smoothly. But I had just lost a major investment. My biggest client had backed out of our deal. What if I couldn't land another contract in time? What if the child support barely covered anything? What would happen to the house? And worst of all, if Philip did marry her, would he abandon David completely? What if our son got sick or needed something I couldn't provide alone? A crushing weight settled on my chest, suffocating me. Philip was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he finally said. "Before you found out, I never really thought about divorce." "And now?" I pressed. Silence. A pounding ache spread through my skull. I hadn't slept all night and the lack of rest was triggering one of my migraines. Philip noticed. He got up, walked to the kitchen and returned with a glass of water and some painkillers. "Take these," he said. "Get some rest. I'll go check on David." And just like that he sidestepped the question. Then he was gone. I closed my eyes. And all I felt was emptiness. I had no idea where to go from here. In the days that followed, we both silently avoided the topic. There was a fire burning inside me, a desperate need to let it all out, yet I held back, afraid that once I did the outcome would be something I wasn't ready to face. Philip carried on as usual, going to work, coming home as if nothing had happened. But he no longer went for his night runs or gym sessions. The so-called weekend team-building activities were never mentioned again. I kept myself busy with freelance work, taking on projects as usual. Whenever I had the time I picked up David and brought him home myself. Every evening, we still had dinner at his parents' house. Conversations revolved around David and I played along, exchanging a few words with Maria and Philip's father. But once we returned home the silence between us was unbearable. We sat on opposite ends of the couch with David between us, a physical reminder of the chasm that had formed. At night I often woke up alone, disoriented, hoping that everything had just been a terrible nightmare. But the cold, empty space beside me reminded me that this was real. And all I could do was cry myself to sleep night after night. Until morning came. There is no greater agony than standing at a crossroads, unable to choose a path. From the outside it looked like I had options, like there were many roads ahead. But every one of them was shrouded in fog, lined with thorns, leading nowhere I wanted to go. Philip's parents must have sensed something was wrong. On weekends they started taking David out more often, leaving the two of us alone in the house. Philip, in turn, had resumed his old habits. He helped around the house again, washing dishes, folding laundry, quietly slipping back into the routines of a husband who cared. Sometimes I brewed a pot of tea and put on a movie. He would sit on the opposite end of the couch, eyes locked on the screen, though I couldn't tell if he was actually watching or just lost in thought. Only when his phone lit up on the sofa did his gaze flicker toward it. But he never picked it up. I knew what he was struggling with. He was torn between this home and the woman outside. And I was trapped in my own quiet heartbreak. Heartbroken over my own weakness, my own helplessness. Heartbroken that, despite everything, I still couldn't find the strength to leave. That some foolish part of me was still waiting, hoping, praying that he would come back, that we could return to the life we had before. But in the end he didn't even give me that chance. Philip brought up divorce late one night out of nowhere. He sat across from me looking drained, his expression twisted with pain and guilt. "I can't lie to you anymore," he said, his voice hoarse. "I never really ended things with her. I've thought about this over and over and I don't feel the same way anymore. I care about you as family, as a friend, but there's nothing left between us as a couple. Please let me go. Let's get a divorce." His words cut through me like a knife. So many years of marriage and all it came down to was let me go. A bitter numbness spread through my chest. "She's divorced now, isn't she?" I swallowed back my tears and sneered. "And now you're ready to abandon your wife and child too?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. She left her husband for me. I can't turn my back on her." "But you can turn your back on me? On David?" I couldn't contain my fury. I shot up from the couch, grabbed the ashtray beside me and hurled it at him. He let out a sharp cry as it struck his forehead, the edge slicing through his skin. Blood immediately welled up and trickled down his face. I clenched my fists, breathing heavily. For a moment I wanted nothing more than to destroy him. To end this. To end everything. "Mommy, what happened to Daddy? Why is he bleeding?" David's small, frightened voice jolted me back to reality. I wiped my tears away and turned to scoop him into my arms. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Daddy just bumped his head. Go back to bed, okay?" He was still half asleep, clearly startled by Philip's outcry. But even in his drowsy state he cared. He ran over to his father, eyes full of worry. "Daddy, are you okay?" Philip forced a smile and waved him off. "I'm fine. Go to sleep." David hesitated, glancing between us, but in the end he listened and let me lead him back to his room. By the time I returned, Philip was still sitting there, pressing a hand against his wound, though the blood hadn't stopped. I took a deep breath and asked, David loves you so much. Are you really okay with taking his home away from him? Philip sighed, exasperated. This is between us. As long as you don't fill his head with nonsense, I'll always be his father. I'll still love him the same way. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. That's bullshit. Get out. I don't ever want to see you again. He flinched but didn't move. Instead, he stubbornly pressed on. When do you want to finalize the divorce? My anger boiled over. I met his gaze ice cold. You want a divorce? Fine. Bring her with you to apologize to me first. And you leave with nothing. His face twisted with anger. Victoria, don't push it. You're being completely unreasonable. Then he stood, grabbed his coat and strode toward the door. Don't think refusing to sign will give you any power over me, he snapped. I'm done with this place. I won't be coming back. The door slammed behind him. And just like that, this house was no longer ours. It was just me and David now. The night wind howled through the open window. The tears on my face dried quickly, and before I knew it, I had no more left to cry. My mind held on to only one thought. How do I make sure David and I live better than ever without him? Maybe it was the shock from the night before, but the next morning, David woke up with a fever. I rushed him to the hospital, barely stopping to catch my breath. By the time we returned, Philip was gone. So were his clothes, his belongings. Everything of his had been cleared out. All he left behind was a single message: frowny face, I'll file for divorce after 2 years of separation. But I still hope we can part on good terms. I hope you come to terms with this soon. I let out a silent sigh, swallowing the emotions that surged in my chest. After giving David his medicine and tucking him into bed, I sat down at my desk and began sorting through my finances. I counted my cash, reviewed my investments, and mapped out everything I had left. Philip and I had roughly the same amount of money. If we divorced, I wouldn't be getting much from him. The house would likely be split 50-50. I decided to set aside only a small portion of my funds for high-risk investments, placing the rest into safe, stable assets. This was my safety net, David's future. I couldn't afford to gamble with it. As for whether Philip would voluntarily pay child support or contribute to household expenses, I had no illusions. A man willing to abandon his wife and child wouldn't be relied upon for financial support. His final, decisive departure left a gaping wound in my heart. The cold wind that rushed and stung like ice, but it forced me awake. I straightened my back and forced myself to confront a future without him. Victoria, I told myself, you've spent 30 years hesitating, overthinking and playing it safe. It's time to change that. With renewed determination, I pulled up my list of old clients and started making calls one by one. Maybe luck was finally on my side. Several former clients whom I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly interested in working together again. A long-lost spark of excitement ignited inside me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt confident again. These past few years after having David, I had lost my drive. I had let myself slow down. It was clear now. Complacency was a luxury I could no longer afford. By the time I finished my last call, the afternoon sun had climbed high in the sky. David was still asleep, but his fever had finally broken. I was about to head to the kitchen to make him some porridge when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Maria standing there, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands full of food containers. It was clear. Philip had already told them his decision. "Can I come in for a moment?" she asked hesitantly, her voice unsure. I hesitated. Then, despite everything, I found myself nodding. For years Maria and her husband had been good to me and David. They didn't deserve to be shut out just because of Philip's choices. "We already gave him a good scolding," she said as soon as she stepped inside. "His father even slapped him across the face." Her voice trembled and tears welled up in her eyes. "I know Philip is in the wrong. I never imagined my son would turn into the—" I stayed silent. "Victoria, he's lost his mind, his life was too easy and he got careless. Can you give him some time? Don't rush into a divorce just yet." I let out a bitter laugh. "It's not me who wants a divorce," I said flatly. "Philip is the one in a hurry to run off into the sunset with her. He's the one begging me to let him go." Maria spat on the floor in frustration. "As long as his father and I are still alive, he can forget about getting a divorce. I didn't have the energy to argue. It didn't matter what she thought. Philip had made his choice and so had I. Changing the subject, I said, Maria, David has a fever. Could you help me make some porridge and watch him for a bit? I have several video meetings this afternoon and won't be able to stay with him the whole time. Maria immediately nodded. Of course. You go work, I'll take care of him. She was an excellent cook. Even though I had no appetite, I forced myself to finish a bowl of rice. I had no intention of cutting off my in-laws just because of Philip. David still needed care and for now, they were the best people for the job. I needed to use every resource available to me. Because my priority now wasn't fighting over a broken marriage. It was making myself strong enough to weather any storm. I remember taking a personality test once. The instructor had laughed at my results. Your feeling score is a 2. Your thinking score? A solid 18. You're a pure rationalist. Back then I had been so in love with Philip that I had forgotten that about myself. I had built a life on just those 2 points of emotion. Foolishly believing love alone would be enough to make everything work. But now, after everything that had happened, I finally saw the truth. Love, anger, hatred, none of it held any weight in the face of reality. And feelings. They were fleeting, unpredictable, and utterly unreliable. Life didn't stop just because Philip was gone. David still spent a lot of time at Maria's place, eating meals and playing like nothing had changed. As for me, I was busier than ever. Every day was packed with work, constant client meetings, and back-to-back negotiations. But whenever I had time, I made sure to be with David, helping him with schoolwork, taking him out, making up for every second I had once taken for granted. Philip and I still exchanged occasional messages on WhatsApp. I had no problem listing out every single household expense and sending it to him. He wasn't dead. He wasn't even divorced yet. That meant he was still financially responsible for half of everything. Surprisingly, he accepted this arrangement without complaint. The money always arrived on time. Every couple of months, he would drop by Maria's house to visit David. But he never came to mine. And I never went to Maria's for dinner anymore, which meant Philip and I never saw each other. Maria, ever the peacemaker, tried to reassure me whenever she dropped David off. He still cares about this family, she would say, like she genuinely believed it. I let the words pass in one ear and out the other. Philip wasn't holding on to this family, he was holding on to the illusion of being a good father. It had nothing to do with me. Still, no matter how much I told myself I was fine. The nights were the hardest. Lying awake in the dark, I would stare at the ceiling, wondering how my once warm and complete home had crumbled into this. Had I really been that unbearable? Was I really that unlovable? Each time my thoughts spiraled, a wave of suffocating sadness washed over me. Music became my only escape. A distraction. A barrier against the loneliness creeping in. But no matter how deep the ache, I refused to cry. Tears wouldn't change anything. Crying to myself wouldn't fix anything. Almost a year after Philip left, his father, John, was diagnosed with late-stage liver cancer. It was inoperable. All they could do was manage his symptoms and try to prolong his time. Maria begged Philip to move back home, but he refused. Instead, he rented an apartment near his own, close to the home he shared with his mistress, so his parents could live nearby and he could take care of them. Maria, guilt-ridden, apologized to me. Victoria, I'm so sorry. As soon as John gets a little better, we'll move back and help with David again. I smiled politely. It's okay. I can handle things on my own. When people get old and sick, they cling to whatever support they can get. I didn't blame them. During this time, my business finally started picking up. I landed a few new clients, not quite as big as the one I had lost, but close enough. I told myself that small, steady growth was better. Less risk, fewer sudden losses. I even hired a part-time assistant to handle routine tasks so I could free up more time for David. If his father wasn't going to be there for him, then I would make sure he never felt the absence. David was almost ready for elementary school now. He had sensed the shift in our home, in his life. Without a father around, he had matured faster than I ever wanted him to. Since then, my only interaction with Philip's family was the monthly child support deposit. I assumed they were busy with John's illness because no one came to see David anymore. I didn't ask. I enjoyed the peace. Then 6 months later, John lost his battle with cancer. The hospital called the family in, saying it was time to say their final goodbyes. That was when Philip finally reached out to tell me he was coming to take David to see his grandfather one last time. I stood at the door and watched as David climbed into Philip's car. When he returned, I sent the housekeeper downstairs to pick him up. I never went to the car. Never saw Philip. Because I still remembered his words clearly, "I'm never coming back to this house." And if that was the case, then there was no reason for me to see him either. Nearly 2 years had passed, and now, sitting across from Philip again, I felt nothing but calm indifference. He, on the other hand, seemed restless, avoiding my gaze, filling the silence with meaningless small talk. I frowned. "Did you bring the divorce papers?" He ignored the question. His eyes landed on the car keys on the coffee table, his expression shifting to surprise. "You bought a car?" "Yes." My tone was flat. His lips curled into a half-smile as if trying to make conversation. "You used to refuse whenever I suggested you get one. What changed?" I met his gaze, my voice tinged with mockery. "Because when an emergency happens, there's no one to rely on. I had to learn to rely on myself." The smile faded from his face. After John passed away, Maria's health deteriorated. Now she could only manage the occasional phone call to check in on David. But that was fine. Life had become steady and I was content with that. We no longer spoke of Philip. But that winter David fell sick, and for the first time I truly understood what it meant to be alone. It happened in the middle of the night. David woke up crying, his face flushed. "Mommy, I don't feel good," before he could finish his sentence. He vomited all over the bed. One look at his fevered face and I knew I needed to get him to the hospital. I grabbed my phone and called for a ride. No drivers. Then I noticed, outside it had started snowing. Panic surged in my chest. Our neighborhood was already hard to get a car from on normal days. Now with the heavy snow it was impossible. I increased the tip. Still no response. Meanwhile David kept throwing up, clutching his stomach, crying in pain. Out of desperation, I thought of Philip. Maria had mentioned that he lived only 10 minutes away. I hesitated for half a second before dialing his number. It rang a few times before his groggy voice came through. "Hello? Philip, I need you to come here." "No. David's really sick. I can't get a ride." My voice was pleading, desperate. He paused. Then, sluggishly, he replied, "I just got back from a business trip. My head is killing me. I have a meeting early in the morning. Kids get sick all the time, it's not a big deal. Just keep trying for a ride." In the background I heard another voice. A woman. Annoyed. She muttered, "Why is she calling you in the middle of the night? It's her kid, she should figure it out herself." At that moment something inside me broke. How had I ever loved this man? Without another word I hung up the phone, grabbed David in my arms and ran. The snow outside had already piled high. It was freezing. Yet my whole body was drenched in sweat. I ran all the way to the main road, my breath coming out in sharp gasps. At last I spotted a fast food restaurant still open. I stumbled inside, begging for help. One of the employees, a young man with a car, immediately offered to drive us to the hospital. David kept vomiting during the entire ride, barely able to sit upright. He could only lean against me, his little body limp with fever. When we arrived, the young man helped carry him into the emergency room. As he set David down, he asked casually, "Where's his dad?" I barely moved my lips as I replied, "Gone." Then came the test results. The doctor hesitated before speaking. "His white blood cell count is extremely high. We need to monitor it overnight. If it doesn't go down, we might need to consider the possibility of leukemia." I went numb. I hadn't dressed properly before rushing out, and now my sweat-dampened clothes clung to my skin, making me shiver uncontrollably. But I didn't have time to feel cold. In a daze, I carried David to the 4 station, paid for his medication and held him close while he slept, his small hand resting in mine. The hospital at night was still bustling. Mothers and fathers surrounded me, working together, taking turns comforting their sick children. Some had grandparents there too, offering extra support. I had no one. The emptiness hollowed out my chest, leaving nothing but a dull, aching void. I had spent the whole night running on adrenaline. Now my stomach, empty from hours of stress, twisted painfully. A familiar burning sensation crawled up my throat. An old enemy, my stomach ulcers rearing their head again. Pain shot through me. But it also snapped me back to reality. There was no time for self-pity. I had to start preparing. If David was sick, if it really was leukemia, what were my next steps? Where was the best hospital for treatment? How much would it cost? Would I need to sell the house? How could I balance working and taking care of him? I pulled out my phone and started taking notes, writing down every possible scenario, every obstacle we might face. Tears blurred my vision, dripping onto the screen. I wiped them away and kept writing. Not a single one of my plans included Philip. I had long since stopped expecting anything from him. But if it came to it, if we needed a bone marrow match, if we needed financial support, I would drag him to court if I had to. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to focus. No matter what was ahead of me, no matter how steep the climb, I would get David through it. I would carry him down any road, no matter how treacherous. And I would do it alone if I had to. Luckily, fate was on our side. By the next morning, David's fever had broken, and his white blood cell count had returned to normal. After a thorough checkup, the doctor confirmed it had all been a false alarm. It was just the flu. Because he was still young, his symptoms had been more severe than usual, but there was no underlying condition. And so, the very first thing I did after that terrifying night was buy a car. I figured I'd be needing it often, I said flatly to Philip. Better to rely on myself than to waste time begging for help. I told him without emotion about that night, about the sheer panic, the helplessness, the desperate search for a way to get my son to the hospital. A night he had been completely absent from. Philip lowered his head, guilt flickering across his face, but still he tried to defend himself. I really wasn't feeling well that night. I didn't know David was that sick. If I had known. He stopped mid-sentence as if realizing that whatever excuse he came up with, it wouldn't change anything. Because at the end of the day he had no real promises to give. I smirked, unimpressed, and steered the conversation back to what actually mattered. I'm keeping this house, I said. David's school is nearby and I'm used to living here. If you agree, I'll buy out your half. Philip didn't respond. Instead, he hesitated for a moment before saying, I didn't come here just to talk about the divorce. I remembered something. The last time I spoke to David on his birthday, he told me he wanted to go to Japan to see the owls. I have some free time now. Why don't we take him? His expression was hopeful, almost eager. I looked into it. There's an owl exhibit at Hughes 10 Bosch. They let you pet them. And there's a fireworks festival, he'd love that. Let's go together. I let out a sharp laugh. The last time? I repeated, mocking. David's birthday was in May. He was barely 5 the last time you called to wish him happy birthday. He's been in elementary school for months now and you're only just remembering. What? Your schedule finally cleared up. You're done playing house with your mistress and her kids. He stiffened, caught off guard. For a second he seemed genuinely disoriented. Have I really been gone that long? He murmured. I walked over to the bookshelf, picked up a framed photo and handed it to him. I already took him, I said. Philip stared at the picture in stunned silence. You were right, I continued, my voice even. He loved that owl exhibit. So much so that we went 3 times before he was satisfied. Philip's fingers tightened around the frame. You went alone? Just the 2 of you? You used to be terrified of traveling alone, he said slowly, as if struggling to reconcile the past with the present. You were always afraid of getting lost, of not speaking the language well enough, of something going wrong. You worried about David getting sick overseas and not knowing how to get him medical help. How did you? I smiled. Because fear is a luxury. You're allowed to be afraid when you have someone to fall back on. When you know deep down, there's always someone there to catch you if you stumble. But when you have no one, when there's no safety net beneath you, you don't get to be afraid anymore. You just figure it out. And that's when you realize, most things aren't as impossible as they once seemed. On David's birthday, one of his classmates from preschool brought him a stuffed owl as a gift. The boy was full of excitement, eagerly recounting his experience of petting real owls in Japan. David was fascinated. He remembered how, in the past, Philip had always been the one to plan our trips, so without hesitation, he picked up the landline and called him. I hadn't known about it at the time. Later he came to me disheartened and asked, Mommy, why doesn't Daddy want to come with us? I told him way ahead of time, but he still said he didn't have time. I didn't want to burden him with the complexities of adult relationships. didn't want to tell him that his father's heart had drifted so far away that David was no longer his priority. One day he would understand. For now, I just comforted him, murmured reassurances, while silently cursing Philip in my mind. Then, I started thinking, could I take David to Japan on my own? Since Philip had left, I had done so many things I once thought I couldn't. What was a trip to another country compared to that? So, I planned everything meticulously, down to the last detail. And then just the two of us, David and I, set off on a 2-week journey through Japan. We traveled by train from Fukuoka, stopping along the way until we reached Saga. At one point, David caught a mild flu. But I had come prepared. I had packed antiviral medicine. After a dose and a good night's rest, he was back to his usual energetic self the next morning. We explored the town with a paper map in hand, using a translation app to stumble through basic Japanese as we rode buses to visit the Saga Aquarium. We sat down at a roadside stall and devoured an entire platter of grilled oysters, licking our fingers clean. There was a moment of sheer chaos. Me sprinting through the station with a suitcase in tow, dragging David along just to catch the train to Houston Bosch. Later, as we floated along the canal on a boat, watching the windmills in the distance, sunlight warming our faces, I turned to David and, mimicking Don Quixote from his storybook, declared, I challenge them all to battle. I shall slay every last one. David giggled, his laughter bright and unburdened. Throughout the entire trip he never once mentioned Philip. He was simply happy, soaking in every moment, cared for by a mother who loved him more than anything in the world. And in that instant as I looked at him I felt it too. A sense of invincibility. Like a medieval knight, unshaken, unstoppable. The bitterness, the resentment of being abandoned, none of it mattered anymore. I had moved on. Because a woman with courage and capability doesn't need anyone to complete her. She can live fully, brilliantly, all on her own. Just say it. If you're not here to talk about the divorce, then what do you want? I asked impatiently, watching Philip fidget in his seat. David would be out of school soon, and I needed to prepare his snack before heading to pick him up. Philip suddenly leaned forward, reaching for my hand. Victoria, let's not get divorced. Let's start over. I immediately recoiled, putting as much distance between us as possible. Was he out of his mind? I broke up with her, he blurted out. This time for good. Completely. He rushed to explain as if I cared. The excitement wore off and I realized she wasn't anything like what she claimed to be. She told me her mother-in-law was judgmental, always criticizing her for being an outsider. But my mom, who got along so well with you, couldn't stand her either. I thought she was someone who loved fitness and had a real passion for life. But after she moved in, she had no interest in working. She just expected me to support her while she spent her days shopping and traveling. And the worst part? She abandoned her kids. Just to get divorced, she left them behind. For the past 2 years she barely went back to see them. Even when I suggested visiting, she got annoyed and said they were no longer her responsibility. I smirked. Funny coming from him. Wasn't it the same? He had barely been around for David. Philip looked embarrassed but pressed on. I'm not like her, he insisted. I still care about David. I never skipped child support, did I? But every time I tried to visit, she threw a fit. It wasn't my choice. I didn't want things to be this way. I didn't bother responding. His excuses were as flimsy as paper. I wanted to leave her for a long time, he continued. But every time I brought it up, she'd threatened to hurt herself. She said she gave up her marriage for me, so I had to take care of her for life. I nodded, playing along. She's not wrong. After all, when you walked out of this house, you said you couldn't abandon her. Philip waved a hand in frustration. I was out of my mind back then. I made a terrible mistake. I've been regretting it every day since. Victoria, you're incredible and I was too blind to see it. I swear, I'll never cheat again. I'll take care of you and David. I won't miss a single moment in his life. Just give me another chance for David's sake. I laughed. Actually laughed. Philip, do you think this is some hotel? You leave when you want and come back when it suits you. He hesitated before weakly saying, but this is our home. I want to come back now. I exhaled sharply, biting back my disgust. You think I've just been sitting here, helpless and desperate, waiting for you to realize your mistake? That the moment you say I was wrong, I'll throw my arms open and welcome you back like none of this ever happened." He looked stunned. "But you never pushed for a divorce." I thought, maybe you were waiting for me too. That I still had a place here. I scoffed. And what else was I supposed to do? Rush into a divorce while my business was struggling, while I was barely getting by? When you left, I was drowning. David was sick all the time. I was exhausted, overworked, and losing sleep every night. If you had come back then, maybe, just maybe, I would have caved. I might have even been relieved. But you didn't come back. You didn't even spare your own son a second of your time. You didn't bother to be a father. So I stopped expecting anything from you. I forced myself to rebuild my business. Forced myself to figure out how to raise David alone. No matter how exhausted I was, no matter how overwhelming it got, I learned to balance it all. When David got sick and you couldn't be bothered to drive 15 minutes to help, I knew there was no one to rely on but myself. So I bought a car the very next day. So I'd never have to ask you for help again. When David asked you to take him on a trip and you turned him down without a second thought, I took him myself. And you know what I learned? It wasn't that hard. You, this house, everything connected to you, we threw it all out a long time ago. We don't need you, Philip. I leaned back, looking at him, taking in the pale, humiliated expression on his face. You should be thanking me, I added, voice steady. If you hadn't left, I never would have realized how capable I really am. His lips parted as if searching for one last excuse, one last plea. I didn't let him have the chance. Tell me, what possible reason do I have to let a man who abandoned his wife and child come crawling back after 2 years? I narrowed my eyes. If you've got any conscience left, be generous when we divide the assets. Pay extra child support. At least that way David will have something good to remember about you. Philip looked like he'd been slapped. His face turned pale, then red, then an ugly shade of blue. And I knew, if he had even a shred of dignity left, he wouldn't dare ask me for another chance. As expected, after that conversation, Philip never again begged for my forgiveness. We finalized the divorce quickly. Maybe my last words had pricked his conscience. When it came to splitting assets, we settled on a 60-40 division, with me taking the larger share. As for the house, I followed through on my promise. Using my savings, I bought out his share, securing full ownership. David's custody was granted to me, while Philip agreed to pay $2,000 in child support each month. I placed no restrictions on when he could see David. If he truly cared about his son as much as he claimed, then he could prove it with actions instead of empty words. Philip, perhaps realizing just how much of a bastard he had been, started making an effort. Whenever he had time, he reached out to David, offering to take him out. I watched from a distance, never interfering. I didn't care whether he was doing it out of guilt, fear of growing old without family, or just a fleeting attempt to make up for his past neglect. As long as someone was willing to spend time and money on my son, I had no complaints. Later, Philip and Maria moved back into our neighborhood. Now David had yet another place where he could be looked after. And I had more freedom than ever. More time to network, meet clients, and expand my business. Things only kept getting better for me. But Philip and we had only one reason to interact: David. Beyond that, I refused to exchange a single unnecessary word with him. Because no matter how much time passed, no matter how clean something looked, I would never make the mistake of stepping into the same filthy water twice. Beneath the surface, I knew there would always be rot.